Ken Whiting here with Paddle TV, and in this video I am giving you my top 10 kayak camping tips. And these tips apply whether you're a sea kayaker, a recreational kayaker, a white water paddler, any paddler doing multi-day trips, these tips apply. This tip is top of mind right now because I'm planning a whole lot of kayak camping trips this coming season, and I just did last season a bunch of kayak camping trips before my shoulder stopped me from doing any more. That hurt. But my shoulder is back online and I have a whole bunch planned this season. And so as I'm planning, as I have been planning, these tips have been on my mind. And so let's dive right in. The first tip is to be flexible with your plans, because problems often happen when we force trips to happen. You know, for flat water trips, it's usually weather that's going to force you to change your plans. And when I say weather, I'm not talking about the air temperature, cold days or rainy days, because you know what? Those are things you can dress to accommodate. Wind isn't something you can dress for. Wind can not only drum up rough water that can make it dangerous to paddle, but depending on the direction of the wind, it may be futile to go paddling because you're not going to make any progress anyway. Now, if you're on rivers and dealing with current, then water levels are going to be the biggest issue. In particular, if the water's too low or too high, it can be either dangerous or not worth the effort to paddle. So you have to be flexible with your plans. The last multi-day trip I did on Lake Superior, a 5-day sea kayaking trip that I did, I had dates planned, but I gave myself a couple of days of wiggle room on each side so that I could shift the dates of my trip if I needed to. I also had some plan Bs in mind. If the wind was just not going to cooperate, then I wasn't just throwing in the towel and saying, you know what, I'm not going to go to one of the most beautiful places in the world, but I'm going to change the plan I had. Fortunately, I had some good wind, but still was able to follow through with my plan A. But you have to be flexible. Now, the second kayak camping tip is to bring a satellite communication device. Cell phones they can be good, but cell service is finicky and the battery life on cell phones is not great. VHF radios can be very helpful for sea kayaking in open water, but they're limiting. They've got a limited distance that you can reach people at, and people have to be listening too. A satellite communicator is just, the joy of it is it's just reliable. Anywhere you are in the world, you can connect to the satellite network and communicate with the outside world. This is the Zoleo. This is the unit I've been using for the past 4 years. I mean, specifically, this is the unit I've used for 4 years now, and it's a key piece of my multi-day safety gear. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing a backcountry trip without it. What I love about it is a couple things. Not only can I message out, and I do every night before I go to bed, I message home and just let the family know, hey, I'm good. And then they can message me at the same time. We can have a quick little message conversation, but it's usually as simple as, great day, I'm A-okay. But I also I can check the weather with the device, and that is really valuable on a backcountry trip so that you can plan for the next day, plan for that day, and make alternate plans if you need to. It also has an SOS button, so if you're really you've got some problems and you need help, you just hit that button. For what the peace of mind you get for this and the peace of mind your family gets for it, they're really not that expensive. $200 for the unit, and then the basic plan, because you have to subscribe to get to have access to the Iridium satellite network, and it's around $20 a month. But that's not even all in a year if you don't need it, because you can pause your subscription when you don't need it too. So you're paying for the months that you're using it. Incredible peace of mind that comes with a satellite communication device. And like I said, I wouldn't be comfortable these days doing a backcountry trip without it. So third kayak camping tip is to practice packing your kayak before you get to the put-in. Packing a kayak is more challenging than packing a canoe. A canoe, you have so much space, you can just take a barrel and a big canoe pack or dry bag, load it up, and you know you're going to have space in a canoe for it. A kayak, because of the small hatches you need to fit things in, you have to break things down into dry bags, and it can be a bit of a puzzle to fit them in. And you may need to change the size of dry bags that you're using to make it all fit. And you don't want to be doing that at the put-in. I learned that the hard way last year. I got to the put-in, and my problem was I'd just done a kayak camping trip. And then I went on this second kayak camping trip, maybe a week or two later. I was testing a different kayak and it had smaller hatches. And so these dry bags that I could fit in that one kayak didn't fit in this other one. And so at the put-in, I had to basically do a pretty thorough repack of my gear, and it delayed my departure by a solid hour and a half. Yeah, and it's not a fun game to play. Practice packing your gear, make sure it all fits, and come up with the right system at home in a controlled environment so that you're ready to go when you get to the put-in. Now, part two to packing your kayak is keeping the heaviest items as centered in the kayak as you can and as low in the kayak as you can. For example, I'll keep the light, bulky stuff in the ends of the kayak. You want the light stuff in the ends of the kayak so that the kayak stays as maneuverable as possible. The more the weight is centered, the more maneuverable your kayak is going to be. The lower you keep the weight, the more stable your kayak is going to be. And so if I don't have enough space in my kayak for everything, I have to put some gear in dry bags on top of the kayak. I'll make sure that the light stuff goes on top of the kayak. And that means things like I keep the food, any water, things like the tent very centered, and I'll keep things like sleeping bag and clothes, sleeping pad, and etc. I'll keep those stuff in the ends or on top of the kayak if I need it. The fourth tip is to bring a super light mesh bag or backpack on your trip. And the reason for that is because you have to break down all your gear into these little dry bags, and carrying all these little bags and pieces that come out of your kayak is a real pain. Well, when you're at camp, when you get to camp, especially if you're in a place that has tides where you might have to carry the gear quite a long way to accommodate for a tide that's coming up, or in a place that the water level will come up for whatever reason. But also maybe you're dealing with portages and you have to take gear out and then move it to somewhere else. Anytime you move gear, when you're kayak camping, it's a pain in the butt because of all the little pieces you have. And bringing a super lightweight mesh bag that you can just toss everything in and carry lots of these little pieces at once makes a big difference. The next tip is to make and use a packing list. Taking the time to create a packing list for your trip will go a long way towards avoiding forgetting something really important. What I do is I have my packing lists in Evernote. It's a simple app, and you can there's free versions of it. And I'm constantly updating it, and I'm updating it whenever I think of something. So whether that's before a new trip that I'm doing, or even on a trip. If on a trip and I go, this is a piece of gear that I never want to bring again, or I wish I had this piece of gear, or I wish I did something different, I'm constantly making notes in my packing list. I have a couple different packing lists depending on what kind of trip it is, so that when I get home, or when I'm getting packed for the next trip, I don't have to try to remember all these little things that I thought of in the moment on a trip. I recorded those notes, and it'll go a long way to making every trip that you do that much better. Now, the sixth tip is a pretty simple one, is when you're loading your kayak, make sure to do it as close to the water's edge as possible. Even better, do it in the water completely or largely in the water. It's really easy, especially in the morning and if it's a bit cold out, to load your kayak on shore so you don't get your feet wet. But a loaded kayak is really heavy. It's a pain to get into the water if you've loaded it on the land, and it can definitely do some real damage to your kayak, in particular if you're using a thermoformed or composite kayak. But really any kayak, don't be lazy, don't worry about the cold toes, and load your boat in the water or as close to the water as possible. And moving right along, the next tip is to make sure you pull your kayak up far enough so that it's not going to go anywhere. If the water level changes, maybe you're just on a river where the water level can change, or maybe you're in the ocean and you've got tides and tidal changes, or maybe you just don't even know if the water level could change on the body of water you're on. Regardless, there's great peace of mind that comes from knowing you've dragged your boat up high enough so that it won't get swept away. It sucks waking up in the middle of the night going in your tent and you're in your tent and in your cocoon of your sleeping bag, just warm and happy, and then you think to yourself, oh my gosh, did I drag my kayak up high enough? What if it floats away? How screwed would I be if my kayak floated away on me? I wouldn't have any way to get out of here. It can make for a miserable sleep. Not to mention, if it actually did happen, it could make for a memorable trip. You're way better off dragging or carrying your kayak further up the bank than you need. And I even, in situations where I'll tie the kayak off to a tree just so that even if the water did come up more than I ever thought it could, it ain't going anywhere. Next tip is to do a bit of a refresher course. There's a reason that when you take first aid courses or CPR courses, when you're a guide or an instructor, that you have to keep doing them every couple of years. You have to do a refresher course because there's a lot of value relearning something that you've already learned to make sure it's there when you need it. And when you're in the backcountry, you might really need some knowledge or skills. Take the time to do some little refresher courses. That might be taking an actual paddling course. It might be taking, I've mentioned the ACA's free online safety course in past videos. And I'll leave a link to that in the description box down below. But then there's also, I've mentioned this in a past video, a couple of guys, James and Simon, have been creating online seakayaking.com and onlinewhitewater.com, 2 online courses. They're not free like the ACA's courses, but they're much more in-depth, really well produced, really great courses. They're great instructors. Definitely worth taking those courses. A small price to learn new things, but I'm sure to learn new things, but also to refresh your memory on things that you should know and should be at the tip of your tongue when it should just be reactionary when you're in the backcountry and you need that information. So again, I'll leave a link in the description box to all of those things. Now, some quick gear tips. For flat water trips in particular, consider using a paddle with smaller blades if you're going to be doing big days of paddling. It'll be easier on your shoulders. You may not be as fast, you may not have as much power, but it can be easier on your body. And that's the whole idea of those longer, narrower touring paddle blades. That's also the idea behind Greenland paddles, is to create less strain on the body for long days of paddling. Another piece of gear that I would recommend is a folding saw versus an axe. Swinging an axe around can definitely end badly on a trip, but they're also not nearly as effective as a good folding saw, which packs down really nice and is lighter as well. And the third gear tip is consider trying a hammock. I tried hammock camping for the first time last year, and I was so surprised by how much I enjoyed it. It doesn't work in every situation, but a couple of key benefits was for a kayak, the hammock packs down really into a bunch of small different pieces, and it makes packing the kayak easier than a tent. But one of the things I loved the most was the fact that I didn't have to get on my hands and knees to scramble into or out of the tent. That means more these days. than it used to. And when I was getting up in the morning, I could literally swing my legs off the hammock and just stand right up. It was really nice to get in and out. I was also really surprised at how well I slept in a hammock. I thought, because I've got some back issues, I thought I might not get a good night's sleep in a hammock, but if you do it correctly, you set it up correctly, you can sleep really, really, really well in a hammock. Next tip is to double check the weather. And that's a good thing to do before your trip, but it's also a good thing to do on your trip. And what I'm talking about when I'm talking about weather in particular isn't the temperature and rain forecast so much. That affects how you're going to dress and what you bring on the trip so that you're comfortable and safe. But more importantly, the wind. The wind can have a profound impact on whether it's safe to paddle or whether it's even worth paddling, or are you going to make any progress at all. And it can even go beyond that a little bit. As an example, last year on Lake Superior, it was a windy day, and I had to paddle out and make a decision. Was it too rough? It was creating some pretty big waves. I had to make a decision on whether I was comfortable enough to paddle in those conditions, knowing that it's a really rugged shoreline, and I had no idea when I'd be able to land. And so I needed to check the weather, not what was the weather at that current time. I had to check the weather to see what it was expected to be like over the next few hours, because there's a good chance I'd be stuck on the water for a couple of hours before I could find a safe spot to land. In that situation, it was really important for me to double check right before I hit the water to make sure that there was no thunderstorm all of a sudden rolling in, or the winds weren't supposed to pick up. And so it was just going to get nastier and nastier and nastier on me while I was out there, and I had no way of landing. And the last tip, definitely not the least tip, relates to dry bags. Dry bags are a key part of any kayak camping trip. Even if your kayak has watertight hatches, they're not waterproof. Anything that goes in your kayak, in the hatches, you have to expect that it can get wet. And that's why if it can't get wet, it needs to be in a dry bag. There are a variety of types of dry bags out there. And what I've learned for me is that the lightweight dry bags, they don't suit my style of trip, because I'm not easy on gear. And so I've often gotten holes in those dry bags, and they've usually come from little bolts or sticky out bits on the inside of the kayak that I didn't know about. When I'm pushing the dry bags in or pulling them out, it slices the dry bag or punctures it. And so I go with the tough bags, the heavy duty ones. They're not as flexible. They weigh a little bit more, but they are durable. I also, and it's a good rule to follow, you want to use more smaller dry bags versus fewer bigger dry bags. That just gives you more packing options in a kayak. And so I tend to stick with 5, 10, 15, and 25 liter dry bags. And every so often on a trip, if I need to put a larger bag for light, bulky gear on top of the kayak, I'll use something a bit bigger than that, a 30, maybe a 40 liter bag. But most of my dry bags are in the 10 to 15 liter range. Well, there you have it. Those are my top 10 kayak camping tips. I would love to hear any other tips you guys have to share. So make sure to leave those in the comments section down below. And if you don't agree with something, of course, leave a comment. I'll be happy to hear a different perspective. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to Paddle TV as well if you haven't already, because I got lots more tips coming your way, as well as gear reviews. And check out my new channel, the Ken Whiting Adventures channel, and subscribe to that one, because I got a lot of kayak camping trips that are going to be released on that channel this season.